My name is Chris Lee. I work for the Solano County Water Agency, and I also represent the Solano Groundwater Sustainability Agency. We are one of 5 groundwater sustainability agencies here in the Solano Subbasin. Collectively, we're calling ourselves the Solano Collaborative, and I will introduce each of the GSAs here shortly. Really want to thank you all for attending. We know you have busy schedules, and we really appreciate you being here tonight. Now, before we get into why we are here tonight, I want to introduce Amy Ryan from Ag Innovations, as we're going to be doing something a little different tonight, and Amy is going to be introducing our Spanish interpreter.
Thanks, Chris. That's right. Welcome, everyone. Thrilled to have you here. And as Chris mentioned, we are having this meeting both in English and in Spanish. And so I'm going to pass it over to Reina, who is here to help us with the Spanish interpretation. She'll give us some tips and pointers and logistics to make sure that the folks that are here and who want to listen in Spanish can do so, and those in English can do so as well. So Reina, over to you. You there, Reina? I can't hear you yet.
Sorry, it helps if I unmute myself.
That's all right.
Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, this meeting will be both in English and Spanish. We do have the Spanish line open and we are broadcasting live. So if you would like to enter interpretations, and this is for anybody who is monolingual, all you do is hit the interpretation channel that looks like a world and select your language preference. Muy buenas tardes a todos. Esta junta está siendo disponible en inglés y en español. Si gustan escuchar la junta en español, favor de seleccionar el icono que parece un globo o un mundo que está abajo de su página. Cuando lo seleccionen, entonces van a seleccionar su lenguaje de preferencia, que en este caso sería español, y de esa manera van a poder escuchar en español. Bienvenidos.
Thanks, Reina.
Okay. Thanks, Reina. Thanks, Amy. So again, welcome. These town halls are for you. We really want to understand the primary concerns of the community tonight. We're going to be going over an overview of where we are in the development of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, or GSP. And I do apologize. We're going to do our best to make sure that we introduce all terms before we start using acronyms. But that one's a mouthful. Groundwater Sustainability Plan, GSP, one and the same. And you're going to be hearing that one all night long. Then we're going to be hearing about the review cycle on the GSP, on how you can provide comments and have any concerns you may have heard by us directly. Later, we're going to be diving a little deeper and have a presentation on groundwater hydrology here in the Solano Subbasin. We'll be doing a few other things along the way, which our facilitators will be discussing shortly. So what we're really trying to do is give you the tools and resources to better engage in helping create a GSP, or Groundwater Sustainability Plan, that works for all stakeholders in the Solano Subbasin. What we are trying to do with this GSP is to make sure we protect our groundwater resources so we can continue with the great ranching and farming traditions for many generations to come here in the Solano Subbasin. Tonight, we also want to introduce you to your local contacts. And right now, I actually would like to introduce a few important folks that are helping us develop the GSP. And I apologize if a few of you come in and I've missed you. So tonight with us, we have Director Kurt Balasik. He's part of the Solano GSA Board of Directors. He is also on the Solano Resource Conservation Board of Directors. We have Director Jack Caldwell, also on the Solano GSA Board of Directors and with Cal Water. We have Director Lance Porter, Vice President of the Solano Irrigation District Board of Directors, which also serves as the Solano Irrigation District GSA Board. And let's see, we also have Mr. Jack Batchelor from Congressman Garamendi's office and the former mayor for the city of Dixon. So welcome tonight. So I'd also like to introduce our GSA Collaborative, and these are your local contacts, and we'll be putting up the GSP website information later where you can get their direct contact information if you have any specific questions on where you are within the subbasin. So again, I'm Chris Lee. I represent the Solano Groundwater Sustainability Agency. We also have Misty Kaltrider, who works for Solano County and is also helping out with the Solano GSA. We have Carrie Keaton, the General Manager for Solano Irrigation District and represents the Solano Irrigation District GSA. We have Curtis Paxton and Justin Cole and Bonnie Robinson from the City of Vacaville. They represent the Vacaville GSA. We have Linda Dorn, who represents Sacramento County GSA, as well as Rodney Frick, who works for GEI Consultants, but he has been working with Linda on the Solano Subbasin and several other subbasins in Sacramento County as well. And then we also have Mr. Eric Ringelberg from the Northern Delta GSA, also with the Freshwater Trust. And also like to introduce staff supporting and presenting tonight. You've already heard from Amy Ryan from Ag Innovations. From Ag Innovations, we also have Susanna Sossman, Lupe Garcias, and their Executive Director, Genevieve Taylor. And then from Ludorf and Scalamini, Consulting Engineers, we have Vicki Kretzinger-Grabert, who you're going to be hearing from later during a presentation, as well as Nick Watterson. And from Kennedy Jenks, we have Sachi Itagaki and Jennifer Law Larson, and Emily Finnegan from the Local Government Commission. So at this point, I'm going to pass it back to Amy, who's going to be going over some basic logistics of the meeting.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, I will. So even though I'm sure all of you, or at least most of you, are Zoom pros by now, we want to make sure that everyone has the same information, kind of like being on an airplane. It's mostly for the folks that are there first, but the risks are much lower. Just Zoom. So as Raina explained, we're going to invite everyone to join a language channel. So if you move your mouse, you'll see this little interpretation signal and symbol, and you can choose English or Spanish. And you can also rename yourself. And we'd love it if you put your first and last name, as well as either EN if you're going to be joining in English, or ES if you're joining in Spanish. And that's particularly helpful for when I create breakout rooms later. So spoiler alert, there will be breakout rooms later. And here's the main menu bar. So again, if you move your mouse on your screen, or if you're on a tablet or a phone, you can tap your screen. And some of these options, if you're on a tablet or a phone, it'll look a little different. But on a computer screen, it looks like this. And on the bottom, you'll see mute and unmute. For the sake of the audio, and just to make sure that there's limited background noise, I'm going to keep everybody muted, but you can unmute yourself if you have a question later on. And feel free to start and stop your video. It's a lot more fun and engaging if folks have their videos on. It's really fun to see everybody. But if you do need to go to the bathroom or take care of yourself, feel free to stop your video. And then you'll be able to click here to see a list of participants. And if you want to chat with folks, I'll go over that in a moment, but there's a chat function. And there's also a pretty fun little reactions button. So if you're liking what people are saying, or you're excited, you're hearing good news, or want to just cheer on the presenters, it's always nice. Since we can't really read body language as much, it's fun to get things back as a facilitator. So that's some of that information. Let's go to the next one. So if you want to move between gallery view to see a lot of people, there's, let's see, 58 folks on the call right now. We had 90 register, so there'll be more trickling in. If you want to see lots of people at once, you can go to gallery view. This is what it'll look like. Otherwise, up at the top, you can click speaker view, and that's particularly helpful for when there's a presenter happening. We'll be sharing our screen, so it'll automatically take speaker view, but you can toggle back and forth. Here's for more people if you want to scroll through the list. And again, the toolbar is down there. And lastly, if you click on participants in the chat box, this is what it'll look like over here. So when you have questions later on, we invite you to raise your electronic hand, because there are so many screens of different folks. If you raise your physical hand, we won't be able to see you. So here's the raise your electronic hand, again, the chat box, and you can chat either to everybody at once, or if you want to chat privately, if you have any tech questions, for example, for myself. I've also got Susanna Sossman and Lupe Garcia here as backup. You can send any of us a private message and we can help you out. And that is the next lead in to, in order to practice our chat abilities, I'm going to invite everyone to put your name, where in the Solano Subbasin you live, work, or farm, and a word or two, a brief sentence about what brings you here tonight. And again, you can click on the chat button, make sure it's going to everybody, and share your name where you're from in the Solano Subbasin and what brings you here. We'd love to see. So you can do that. We'll keep going. We won't wait for all 59 of you to get it in there, but as we go, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, and now I'm going to pass it over to you, Genevieve.
Great. Hello, everyone. We're so glad to have you here. My name is Genevieve Taylor. I'm a managing facilitator and executive director here at Ag Innovations. Ag Innovations is a nonprofit that works on helping all of us collaborate together around issues affecting agriculture, natural resources, and our communities. So we've been working in Solano County in the Solano Subbasin for many years now, and I am the facilitator for the Groundwater Sustainability Plan process. So Amy, can you remind me if I'm sharing my screen at this moment? Great, so I will go ahead and share my screen. And are you all seeing a presentation?
Yes.
It is now in present mode.
now.
Excellent. All right. One more moment. So this is one of the realities of working online. There's all sorts of advantages, like we are all probably in our genes, and also some challenges, like we have to hang around with technical logistics. All right. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about how we're organizing tonight. First of all, I think it's important just to reiterate, we know that groundwater is essential. We also know that your voice is essential, and our hope tonight is to bring your voice in. So we've designed it as best as we can through a virtual space to help you bring your voice in. The best way actually is using chat, and we have a few other things like polls and breakout sessions where we'll get a chance to talk with the experts. But that's the first piece to know, is that tonight is really about what we can bring to help you understand more what's happening around groundwater sustainability planning, and then how to bring your own voice in now and through the whole of the project. So tonight we will be doing updates on the Solano GSP development process and how you can get involved. We'll be presenting the Solano Subbasin Preliminary Surface Water System water budget. And we'd like to understand your primary groundwater concerns. We're really hoping to have you help us understand what you're thinking about. And of course, we've already introduced you, and you'll get a chance to get to know a bit your local GSA contacts. I'll also say, at the end of the evening, there'll be a moment to pause for some informal time if you wanted to stay after the meeting. So our agenda for tonight is welcome, as we are doing right now. In a moment, Chris will cover the Solano GSP development process, and I'll share some pieces around community engagement. Then we go into Q&A and some questions around public input. We'll hear at 7 o'clock from Vicki from Ludorf and Scalmanini around groundwater hydrology in the subbasin. Another round of Q&A and input. We have some questions for you. And then we'll go to next steps and closing. And again, at 8:30 is when we are, well, actually, did I get that wrong? Sorry. At 8 o'clock or so when we're completed, if you want to stay and end with us and ask any additional questions, you can at that point. So we have a poll that we wanted to launch that has a couple of questions. So Amy, do you want to go ahead and share that poll now?
I sure do. Okay, everyone should see it.
So we'd love to know, as we are talking with all of you, have you heard of the of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act? And have you ever participated in a discussion about groundwater in the Solano Subbasin? So that might be last year when we did a public input session, or it could have been during the governance formation phase when the groundwater sustainability agencies were formed. And maybe for some of you, maybe there was other opportunities. All right, so we have 28 or so participants. Give it a minute more.
And while we're waiting for folks, I just want to remind everyone, we've had quite a few people join since we first said it, that this meeting is recorded, and it's also it's on streaming on YouTube now, and it will be available later. So we'll be putting it up on the website for the Solano GSP. So you'll have access to it and can share it with folks who couldn't make it tonight. And we'll also be taking some screenshots throughout the time. So you won't notice that, but there will be times that we capture the screen and record the whole meeting. So just so you're aware of that.
Great. All right, so it does sound like a significant portion of our group has heard of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So that's really helpful. And for those of you who haven't, but you're not really clear on it, we will definitely talk about it tonight, and we'll also provide resources for you to look into it. The other question of, have you ever participated in discussion? And it looks like, about 2/3 have and about 1/3 hasn't. And that's great. We're so glad that we're getting folks that have participated and can offer insight and perspective from, a longer discussion here. And also that we get to bring in folks that are new to the conversation. We really hope to hear from you tonight. So Amy, I think I can end this poll now. Is that right? Great. Okay. And will you share the results? Can I just leave that to you?
Do you want me to share the results right now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, let's do share results. Can everyone see it? Just give me a nod if you can. Okay, great.
Awesome. All right. Okay, well, so tonight we have set up a few guidelines that should help us have a really good conversation together about these topics and others. And so a few of them, these are simple guidelines that we've learned that have worked well in many different conversations. So the first is to listen generously. And what that means is know that there's probably a range of perspectives. You may agree, you may disagree, but listening curiously and ensuring that you're helping folks be heard is really going to be so helpful tonight. The next is speaking candidly and also concisely. We really want to hear from you and hear, the perspectives that you bring. And if you can mind your airtime, it'll help everyone have an opportunity to participate. Third, we'd love you to suspend certainty. And so what that means is we come in knowing one slice of what it is, of the full picture. Tonight is also a night to hear other slices of the picture and to be curious about how they are approaching things, why maybe we've come to the conclusions that we've come or in the process that we've come, and to ask questions about it. So if you can do that, that'll really generate some great conversation, particularly in our breakout groups. We love questions, and so no question is a bad question. If someone's saying, God, could somebody just really define Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, for example, go ahead and ask that question. If you don't hear it answered in a way that helps you a little bit later on tonight. Okay, finally. All right, so at this point, we are ready to go to Chris. Amy, is there anything that I've forgotten before we hand it over to Chris?
According to my list, you got it all.
Okay, excellent. All right, so Chris, just feel free to tell me next slide when you're ready.
Sure, thanks Genevieve. So good evening again, Chris Lee again with the Solano Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Genevieve and I are going to tag team on this next part. As Genevieve mentioned, we've done a few of these types of meetings over the last couple of years, and it's really good to see in the poll that quite a few of you already know about SGMA. So we're not going to be getting too far into the nuances of SGMA tonight, but if there are any specific questions, as Genevieve said, go ahead and put them in the chat, or we can talk about them during the breakout sessions. And this is probably a good time to put a plug in for our website. So we have a website for the Solano Groundwater Sustainability Plan, or Solano GSP, where there actually is quite a bit of information about SGMA and the GSP. And if one of the team members can put that in the chat, it is at www.solanogsp.com. Fairly easy to remember. And there's all kinds of information. You can sign up for meetings and email blasts and whatnot. Please go check it out. So what we want to cover over the next 20 minutes or so is give you a look at the Solano Subbasin and talk about the GSAs. Discuss key elements of the GSP, our timeline, our technical partners, and then the funding. And then Genevieve is going to be talking about our community engagement. Next slide, please. So in Solano County, we have 3 subbasins or parts of subbasins. The Solano Subbasin is a medium priority subbasin, and why we are required to develop a groundwater sustainability plan under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It's essentially, if you look at the map, the whole eastern portion of Solano County and extends out into the Delta and Sacramento County as well. And this is kind of a small map. You're going to see it a few more times in different variations, but if you do go to the website, we actually have a poster-sized version of the subbasin map that shows all the roads within the subbasin. So if you have any questions, if you're on the edge of the subbasin and want to know if you're really in it, take some time and go look at the website, and that might be able to clear it up for you, or send us a note again in the chat. So one of the things I did want to talk about when it comes to SGMA, if you are in the subbasin and you are utilizing 2 acre-feet of groundwater per year or less, which is not a whole lot of water, a typical family of 4 uses much less than 2 acre-feet of groundwater per year, you are considered a de minimis user, and thus generally not required to abide by the conditions of the groundwater sustainability plan. And there's a bunch of conditions and caveats that go with that, and I'm not going to go into all the different scenarios that may play out there. But if you have any questions, and if you're just using groundwater for domestic purposes, again, put something in the chat or look at the contacts on our website if you're within one of the GSAs, and we can help potentially clear that up for you. So as I mentioned earlier, the Solano Collaborative is made up of these 5 GSAs. I represent the Solano GSA. This is the large green area on the map. The city of Vacaville GSA, which is the brown area on the map. We have the Solano Irrigation District GSA, which is the tan area on the map. Then we have the Sacramento County GSA, which is the, I'm not sure what that is, that's maybe a light purple. And then we have the Northern Delta folks just to the east of the Sacramento County GSA. And contact information, again, for all these people, all these GSAs can be found on our website. Next slide, please. So as you're all aware, the GSP discusses some pretty technical issues like water budgets and sustainability goals and undesirable results. Our job is to make it as accessible as possible for all stakeholders, to try and make it an easy read. And that is not going to be an easy task. What you're going to be seeing in these sections is kind of a summary of how we've gotten to this point. And for those of you that want to dive a little deeper, there are going to be a lot of appendices in the GSP that have technical memorandums that shows our work, our analysis, the data. So for those of you that want to dive a little deeper, that information is going to be there as well. But what we're hoping to do with these individual sections of the GSP is to, again, make it as accessible as possible for most stakeholders. And I'm not going to read the list, but you can see the sections and what they cover. And we're going to be talking, as Genevieve said, a little bit later, Vicky's going to be giving a presentation on the subbasin itself and groundwater conditions. And in future meetings over the next year or so, we are going to be diving a little deeper into things like the water budget and undesirable results and a sustainable yield, what that all means, and to get your input all along the way. And that's exactly what we're looking for tonight and all these meetings moving forward. Next slide, please. So I apologize, this slide's a little busy, but I think it's a pretty cool graphic that Ludorf and Scalamini put together that shows our basic timeline. And there's a little overlap. Our consulting team is working on multiple sections of multiple components of each part of the document, so there's some overlap. Section 1 of the document is basically done, and we actually hope to have it up on our website before the end of this month, if not sooner. And actually Section 2 is shaping up quite nicely as well. Where we hope to be by the spring of next year is to be done with sections 1 through 7, and then by the end of next summer, hopefully done with the, maybe by fall, done with the entire document. And Genevieve's going to be talking a little bit about this during engagement and review cycle, but what we want to do is give you a section at a time so you can see where we're headed, so that if you have any concerns or have any issues or any red flags, you can give us that immediate feedback so that we can correct our course and make sure that we are putting this plan in a direction that makes sense for all of our stakeholders here in the subbasin. Because again, what we're really trying to do here is put together a plan that not only protects our groundwater resources and the environment, but make sure that we continue with our great farming and ranching traditions for generations and generations to come. Next slide, please. So we're very fortunate. We have some really smart people working on this, and it's been a huge effort so far. As I mentioned, the Solano Collaborative, we've been working collaboratively, oh gosh, some of us since 2014, as Genevieve mentioned, when we first started looking at forming these groundwater sustainability agencies. And we've been very fortunate in our partnerships with Ag Innovations that has been helping out with facilitation at meetings like this, and also providing education and outreach, as well as our partners at the Freshwater Trust and the Local Government Commission that are also helping with outreach and education. And then for our main consulting firm, Ludorf and Scalamini, they're the ones that are really behind all of this. And you're going to be hearing from Vicki Kretzinger-Grabert later, as well as Nick Watterson, who'll be helping out. And then we have a number of sub-consultants. Kennedy Jenks is actually helping them write the plan. And I think we have Sachi Chigaki and Jennifer Law Larson with us tonight. And then we have some other consultants that are working on very specific parts of the plan, like David's Engineering is working on the water budget, and Wes Jost is helping with management actions, and ERA working on some of the economics of the plan itself. Again, so we're very fortunate. We have some really good, talented people that have had a lot of experience here in the Solano Subbasin. For a couple of them have been working here for more than a decade. Let's see. We've also been very fortunate with funding. We have secured a Proposition 1 and a Proposition 68 grant. We are getting about $1.7 million from the state. The GSAs have also contributed along the way with cash, as well as in-kind services with staff time and reports and studies. We've also had some contributions from the Solano County Water Agency, which actually isn't a part of the GSP, but has contributed with funding for other groundwater investigations that will actually help form the GSP. And then our friends at the Freshwater Trust, they also received a grant through Proposition 1 to help with some of the communities that we haven't largely engaged with in the past. Disadvantaged communities and severely disadvantaged communities, those that rely on drinking water, or groundwater, excuse me, for their only drinking water sources. So very important to engage these communities. So kudos to the Freshwater Trust and their partners at the Local Government Commission for that support as well. And also want to point out DWR. DWR has been a great partner. We've gotten a few facilitation support services to augment the work that Ag Innovations is doing, again, for facilitation and education and outreach. That's been very helpful. And DWR has also given us a technical services agreement where we're working on a project right now, which I think Vicki's going to highlight later, where we're working on some shallow wells along Puda Creek to get a better understanding of groundwater dependent ecosystems. Again, part of our development of the GSP. We do have to talk about plan implementation in the GSP as well. We have to show how we're going to pay for monitoring and reporting, and if we need to, any management actions or projects. And so we're going to be holding off on the specifics of where we go with that for a little while. But there may be some fees in the future that we may need to look at to help pay for some of the implementation. And pretty much like the process we're going through now, we're going to do the same thing with all stakeholders that are interested. We're going to talk to you about how that will look like, what makes sense moving forward, again, to protect our groundwater resources, to protect the environment, to make sure that we can continue with our farming and ranching traditions for many, many generations to come.
Great. Thanks,
And
Chris.
I think I got one last slide.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. Again, that was a big overview, very high level. Again, please, if you have any burning questions, put them in the chat. We'll try to get to them in the breakout sessions. And I'm going to turn it back over to Genevieve, who's going to be talking about stakeholder engagement.
Great. Yeah, it's been really great already seeing your names and where you're coming from and what your interest is in the chat. So if you're just joining us, it would be great to hear more from you, and feel free to add your name and you know, where you live, work, or farm in the Solano Subbasin, and what brings you here tonight. And so far what I'm seeing is folks have been here for quite a while. They're interested because they have land that they think might be vulnerable. They're wanting to look at, you know, they're wanting to contribute to planning around these issues. So we're really glad to have you. A few things to know about. One is just an overview of the SGMA stakeholder engagement requirements. So I'll be sharing that tonight. I'll also be giving you just a high level look at the community engagement plan that we use to actually guide our work around community engagement with the groundwater sustainability plan. We'll look at the Solano GSP review cycle. And so that's really the question of, first of all, how does your input make a difference? How does it influence the process? And how do we both incorporate it as well as weigh it? Because of course, getting all of those comments is a big, hefty process in itself. Again, feel free to chat questions as we go. So let's see. All right. So the first thing to know about SGMA stakeholder engagement is that it's a part of the regulation here. And the intention is really to provide comments during review periods pursuant to those requirements of SGMA, to integrate stakeholders throughout the development of the GSP, and to allow active participation in the decision-making process. And again, bringing public input into the process is a really important piece of it, and it's weighed with the whole range of stakeholders that are a part of it. So I'll talk more about that in just a minute. SGMA stakeholder engagement requirements say that stakeholders must be able to weigh in on the regulations development, GSA formation, which those two phases are already behind us, and then GSP development and implementation. And so that's where we are right now. Under the requirements of SGMA, GSAs must consider interests of all beneficial uses and users of the groundwater in the development of the GSP. So that's straight from the water code that is helping us with this. And I think beneficial uses and users are a really important term that you'll hear more of. And I'll describe those in a moment, but it really means, the folks that are using the groundwater. That's ultimately what it means. It also means the natural systems that are benefiting from the groundwater as well. So the purpose of the community engagement plan is to positively contribute to the development of a GSP that incorporates the understanding, knowledge, and support of the subbasin's diverse population and interests. So a couple of goals is to define and equitably engage the diverse interests of our stakeholders, to leverage local knowledge, expertise, and interests, to facilitate public input, and hopefully to generate widespread support for the plan. Just like Chris said, we don't want this to be a surprise when it comes out, and we hope to be working with you to incorporate and to reflect on input that you give, and then to work with it into a plan that feels like you can all see yourselves in there, or understand if there were trade-offs and balances to be made, why those things had to happen. We're also really hoping to coordinate transparent and meaningful communication between GSAs, so that's the board and the staff, and the community at large. So when we talk about groundwater uses, and let me get to my notes briefly, there's a couple of things to know. And one is that the subbasin has an estimated population of a little less than 120,000 people. About 50,000 residents rely on groundwater for the drinking water. And there's maybe a total of about 170,000 acres of irrigated land. So that's important to know, because you can see there's drinking water, there's agriculture, there's municipal uses, ecosystems, there's cultural resources, and recreational resources. And the groundwater sustainability plan is intended to understand their impact and to guard against impacts against those. Although, of course, there's balancing that has to happen as we figure out what that means for the future. I'll also say that, one resource that all of you know about, I would imagine, is Puda Creek. So that's an important local resource for us as well. And there we go. I think I'll just go ahead and put this up. Looks like we had some animation go awry. So there's a number of ranges of groundwater users here in the Solano subbasin, including large-scale agriculture, municipal water suppliers, farm worker communities, marinas and campgrounds, domestic well owners and users, small scale farming, and then back up here to schools, tribes, ecosystems, mobile home parks. It's interesting because Solano County, absolutely has agricultural production. It's a really important part of the Solano Subbasin as a whole, and it's a large user of groundwater. There's also entire municipalities that rely on groundwater. The cities of Dixon and Rio Vista supply all their water from multiple industrial wells, and nearly a third of Vacaville's water supply comes from underground sources. The Solano Subbasin also includes a dense quantity of shallow wells, which can be used for drinking water, home kitchens, and small scale or tenant farming. And the tribes also use groundwater for cultural practices, subsistence fishing, and sanitation, among other uses. And we're really glad to have Sarah from the Yocha Dehe Winton Nation, which is a neighboring federally recognized tribe located just north of the Solano Subbasin, which their ancestral land actually includes modern day Solano County. So that's an important part of this process as well. One user that isn't as obvious is the groundwater dependent ecosystems in the area. So here in the Solano Subbasin, there's 75 species of birds, 143 species of plants, and 7 different species of fish that rely on ecosystems sustained by groundwater. And finally, there's a lot of small community water systems, about 50 that rely on groundwater for drinking water and supply. Some have maybe 1 or 2 water connections, like a church or a school. Some are much larger, like mobile home parks, marinas, or resorts. We are working with, we are mindful of all of them as beneficial users. And, some of them are not able to connect to larger public water systems, which could make them more at risk to drought conditions and water quality issues. So the question is how do we actually funnel all of the input and request all of the input into the groundwater sustainability plan? And I just want to do a quick time check. Amy, am I okay for time?
I was literally doing the same thing. Yes, you're doing great on time. We've got about 7 minutes left in this block.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you're doing great.
And Genevieve, I also added a question for everyone here into the chat based on what Genevieve just presented, which is which beneficial users are we missing, if any, and who should we be talking to in that case? So if you can think of any that we are missing, please do feel free to put that in the chat.
Yeah, that's great. So the way that we are funneling the input from our groundwater users, or beneficial users, and kind of representatives of the beneficial uses, is first through public input from town halls like this one, through surveys, and we have a survey that we'd love all of you to fill out, and the Community Advisory Committee. So the Community Advisory Committee is about 15 folks that really represent the broad array of communities, of including agriculture, business, schools, folks that have been in the area for a long time or whose families have been here, and who are able to give us a realistic sense of perspective from those unique areas. And we have everyone from small farmers to large farmers. The whole range is there. So we're really pleased to have the Community Advisory Committee. And I'll just say, if you're interested in joining, please reach out to us and we'll tell you more about that. We are considering openings, so you can reach out and we'll talk with you more about that. So step 1 is the technical team incorporates public input and drafts content. So we're gathering this public input, and then the technical team is also incorporating that and drafting their content. The GSA Collaborative then provides their GSA boards with draft content, as well as updates over time. The GSA boards offer feedback. We then go to the technical team, again, that incorporates that feedback and develops a public-facing draft. The public draft section is released for our public and advisory committee review. And so we really, at that point, we really focus on getting advisory committee review, although we've also been asking them broader questions like we'll ask you tonight, and we plan to ask them on October 29th that help understand the larger landscape for them. Then the technical team responds to public input and recommends revisions. The GSA boards provide input on that revised draft section. The technical team finalizes the draft section. And then the technical team will park that section for incorporation into draft GSP. So this is a chapter by chapter process. Our intent is to release it chapter by chapter so that we can get input. And now that you have attended tonight, your email, unless you let us know that you'd rather not be involved, will be on the list for getting notices when those are open for public review. We love your public review, and the sooner the better as they come out. So we will let you know when as those get released over the next year, starting now and into the next year. So where you can get involved in the GSP is a few different ways. So one is the advisory committee. You could ask to be on the advisory committee. You're also welcome to join those meetings as an observer, and there'll be some time to hear your reflections at the end. And we'll be sending out recordings so you can also stay up to date there. In these town halls, in board meetings, you can actually go to the board meetings of your GSA or of the other GSAs, and there's usually a time for public comment at each of those. And then surveys are really great. What's nice about a survey is that we can ask you very specific questions about what kind of groundwater user you are and what it means for you in a variety of different ways. So we really do encourage you to take the surveys as they come out. The intent then is draft chapters will be released on a rolling basis until October 2021. Then there will be a full draft in the winter of 2021. I think we might have gotten this one incorrect. And a final GSP in the early winter of 2022. So in January is when we'll see that final GSP. Chris, would you clarify anything about this? I think this was perhaps a little bit confusing right here.
Yeah, you got it right at the end there. So we do actually have to submit our document to the Department of Water Resources by January 31st of 2022.
Great, awesome. All right, so we have a couple of polls that we'd love to run right now just to get your input. So Amy, the first poll is, which beneficial user group do you most identify with? And so I'll take you back to this one. You a domestic well user or owner, a farm working community, large scale agriculture, marina and campgrounds or mobile home parks, municipal water suppliers.
And you can choose more than one if you don't fit neatly into one. It's multiple choice on this one.
We also have small scale farming, the tribes. I'm assuming are you now seeing how things are coming through? So we have almost half are domestic well users or owners.
They can't see this yet. That's just on our end. Once we launch the results, they can see it, but they can't see who's come in.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's give it just 10 more seconds. Looks like it's slowing down. All right, let's go ahead and end that poll.
Sure.
All right, so you can see we definitely have a good, strong representation from domestic well users and owners. That's great. That's what we were hoping for. We also have farm working communities, a smaller percentage, large scale ag, really happy to have you here. Less on these, and that would make sense. These are kind of specific areas that might actually focus on more the owners of them as well as the residents. I think we need to do some outreach around that. And then different municipal water suppliers, glad to see some schools and some ag. So it looks like ag, if we look at it as about over 50% have some representation around some form of ag, and then domestic well user or owners. And we have one member of the tribes, and I think we know who that is. I'm glad you're here. So let's see, Amy, can you run the next slide, please? Great. So the next slide is, we'd love to know, how do you want to participate in the future? So attending these meetings, does that work for you? Would you be interested in a focus group meeting, perhaps because you have some unique perspective, or, you know, it's good to know if you have a long history with understanding how groundwater works in your area. Observing advisory committee meetings, maybe joining, filling out the survey, offering comments to the GSP.
Once again, you can select all that apply for you. You don't have to choose just one.
All right, and I've opened up the project timeline where you can see the frequency of what these might mean.
I'm seeing a note from Melissa Coleman, which is great. Thanks, Melissa, for sharing. Maybe someone from that GSA, if you're here, someone from the technical team can chat with you in the chat. You've got some great questions.
We still have a couple of
Can
folks.
you repeat where certain cities get their groundwater, like you mentioned, Vacaville and Dixon?
Yeah, so the city of Dixon and Vacaville and Rio Vista are, they supply all of their water from multiple industrial wells, and nearly a third of Vacaville's water supply comes from underground sources. I just want to give a special shout out to Emily Finnegan from the Local Government Commission, who helped with those slides. They've done a terrific amount of research in collaboration with the Freshwater Trust. That's really helped us understand what kinds of use that is happening around groundwater in their efforts to work with the severely disadvantaged communities grant, and just I think in general to work with community engagement around these issues. All right, I think we've gotten as many as we're going to at this point. So we'll go ahead and share results. And you can see many, it sounds like the virtual town hall meetings are a hit. That's great. Good to know. And sounds like there's some openness to participating in focus group meetings, observing advisory committee meetings, maybe even joining the advisory committee. And we really appreciate filling out the survey and offering comments. That's terrific. So for those of you who are interested in the advisory committee meetings or in joining, you can private chat Amy right now and she'll put you on the list, or you can email Amy. And Amy, would you mind putting your email into here so that folks can find you?
I put it in above and I'll put it in again right now in case you've missed it.
Great, excellent. All righty. So thanks everybody. You're already being heard. So when we get this kind of information about how you like to participate, it actually, it's a part of the regulation to ask those questions. As good facilitators, we want to ask those questions and we listen hard. So this is going to really help us as we move forward. All of these questions will be really guiding us as we go forward. So thank you. So I'm going to go ahead, we're going to move into our breakout sessions. And what we'd like to do at this point is you'll be separated into 4 breakout sessions. There's, that'll be, you'll enter one of 4 breakout rooms. There'll be a facilitator and a technical advisor in each one of those rooms. And we'd love to hear, it's like, what would you like us to know? What questions are you left with? And a couple of other questions about like, what are your hopes and concerns? So we'll be heading into that. And all you have to do is, well, press the button, but I'm going to let Amy walk you through this. Yes, that's right. I forgot we had this slide. So do you have any questions? Anything that confused you when you think about groundwater in the future? What worries you? How does groundwater impact your quality of life, your economic reality, the places and environments that you love? And is there anything else that you want us to know? So this question here about when you think about groundwater in the future, what worries you? And how does groundwater impact your quality of life? That's really helpful for us to know. And we are looking forward to doing it. We'll ask you to take a moment when you get in. We'll probably ask you to offer maybe a couple of ideas by chat or to get started, but whether it's by chat or voicing your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you tonight. All right, so Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Genevieve. I'm just grabbing some names as you folks are chatting me names, so I'm trying to multitask. Okay, so breakout rooms, as Genevieve mentioned, we're going to be going, oh, maybe can you click one more time, Genevieve?
Yeah.
There we go. So I'll be going, we've broken you up into 4 different breakout rooms, and each one, as Genevieve mentioned, will have a facilitator who's going to be taking notes, as well as content experts, and I've dispersed the GSA collaborative members and as best I could, and other technical team members. So we'll have a wealth of information in each of the rooms that you'll be able to ask questions and offer input. Those questions will be the ones that Genevieve just had on the screen. The facilitators have those, so you don't have to remember them. They'll help you out. And we really we want your feedback. So as I open the breakout rooms, you're gonna see a box that looks just like that on the screen. You'll click join. When I open the breakout rooms, everybody on the phone will be automatically whizzed there. And everybody who is on video, whether you're on your computer or your tablet, you'll have to manually join. And so if you're on the phone, also when I end the room, you'll be whizzed back, and folks who are here on computer, you'll get a 60-second countdown. So I will send a message about halfway through and it'll flash at the top of your screen when these breakout rooms are going to be about 12 minutes. So when there's about 6 minutes left, you'll get a little note. And it's really helpful, once again, if you haven't already, to turn on your videos in the breakout rooms. That'll be a lot more engaging for both the rest of the participants and help the facilitators track you. And if you get kicked out, don't panic. Just re-enter the Zoom meeting and I'll make sure you get back into the right Zoom room. I think that's it. If you need any technical support, you can just call host and I'll jump into one of the rooms and I'll help as best I can. Okay, so we're going to launch the breakout rooms. If anybody gets left behind, I'll be here and I'll get you to your room. So here we go. Thanks so much. Once again, you should see that there at the top. Okay. And are you guys, Bonnie, do you see a breakout? I can't hear you.
Hang on, I can't see an offering for breakout.
Okay, let me see.
Let me see. I see some other people in the room, but I don't see one.
All right. Let's see. I'm going to assign you to one right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. You're welcome. Okay, welcome back, folks. Everyone will be whizzed back here with us. Just a moment.
Sorry, Jack, I had to cut you off. We were getting kicked out.
Welcome back, everybody.
Time flies.
It does, especially when you're talking about groundwater. I think that's the saying, right? Genevieve, over to you for if we want to do some report outs. We're right on time, so we can do maybe a brief one.
And I am muted. Sorry about that. I was chatting away. So I think, there's always more to be said, and we will be entering into those, hopefully the same breakout groups in just a few minutes. So the conversation was ended, but it'll be rejoined in a little bit after Vicky's presentation. It would be great to hear from our facilitators just a flavor of what it is that you heard. And so I'll start with Susanna. Oops, are you muted?
Yep, got it. Thanks. Yeah, great. Well, we had a little bit of time to first go around and identify what the beneficial uses are within the group that we had, which included sort of small and large agriculture represented, as well as a number of GSA board members. And there were a couple questions in particular about surface water and surface water storage. So, folks were really wondering about how if Lake Berryessa is brought into the plan, because it's not exactly within the subbasin, but certainly connected through the Solano Irrigation District, and then also about plans for water storage as integrated into our projects and management actions that we're going to be looking towards.
Great, excellent. Thanks, Susanna. Let's see, I was the next, and I'll say we had a conversation, first of all, about some burning questions. Quite literally, one question is, what's the impact of the recent fires on groundwater? And so I know we have Chris Rose and Kelly Huff here tonight. If you guys wanted to add a little bit about your efforts around that would be great. Or any other technical team member, if you wanted to talk about what the impacts of fire are on water, that would be great. We also talked about actually a few of our group had an interest in understanding contamination and groundwater quality, and had some, conversation about that. So when we asked what's most concerning to you about the future of groundwater, it was contamination. And in fact, Jeremy had a nice little list there. And Jeremy, just for the sake of everyone, if you would be willing to spell out the acronyms that you had, I think that would be helpful for the group to hear a little bit more about what your thoughts are. So that was the flavor of our conversation. Definitely felt like I'm looking forward to the next session to having a little more time. So the next facilitator is Emily. And Emily, what did you learn?
We had a group of experts who already knew all there is to know about Sigma. No, we had a good conversation about the balance of urban and agricultural water use. Recognizing that Solano is one of the best counties in the state and has a really great chance of weathering the impacts of climate change, and food production and soil quality are really critical to maintaining that richness in the Solano subbasin. So there was some conversation around how to better capture stormwater and how the GSP will speak to urban water conservation. We did have some conversation around protecting ag lands and environmental aspects of the subbasin as well. It was mentioned the heavy smoke conditions and the loss of commercial and ag lands and how that could potentially impact the future of planning. And overall, just how valuable this process is to get an idea of where we stand. It's so important to be able to manage. We need to measure what we actually have within the basin.
Mm-hmm. Great, excellent. Thank you, Emily. And finally, Lupe, what did you learn? Oops, you're muted.
Okay, so one of the topics that came up a lot in our conversation group was the contamination of groundwater. So thinking about how we could have long-term sustainable agriculture in order to reduce that contamination, and what can be done for issues such as runoff contamination, and also just general facts about just the basin and how it functions.
Great, excellent, thanks, Lupe. All right, so that's a flavor, and you know, I'm adding for myself a couple of the questions that I heard from our conversation that need some additional attention from the technical team. And so if you could look at the chat and answer some of that, that would be terrific. Thank you, Chris. There's a response to the fires question. All right, so moving forward, I'd like to have Vicki Kretzenberg-Grabert walk us through a presentation on groundwater hydrology in the Solano Subbasin. So Vicki is going to be sharing her screen. And again, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and you know, we will certainly look at them afterwards, or we might, if we might pause if there's a clarifying question that needs some support. So thanks, Vicki.
Great, thank you, Genevieve, and thank you everyone for attending this evening. We really appreciate your interest and input on this whole process. So as Chris had introduced, the groundwater subbasin of interest here, Solano Subbasin, and all of the GSAs that are comprised within the subbasin. So I'm not going to go over that again, but I just wanted to say that there is only one plan area for the groundwater sustainability plan. Some subbasins, there's actually more than one. So this is helpful to have it all streamlined under one umbrella. In tonight's presentation, I'm going to focus on describing the basin conditions, and I'm summarizing information at a pretty high level. But we're going to focus on the physical characterization of the basin, the status of overall groundwater conditions, and the water resources that are being used in the subbasin. So the water resources in the Solano Subbasin, they play a critical role in the economy and the viability of local interests and livelihoods. And the Solano Subbasin really has a history to be proud of. For more than half a century, the Solano Subbasin has benefited from the leadership and the foresight that resulted in the construction and use of the Solano Water Project to provide surface water for use along with groundwater to meet water demands. The groundwater shortages were recognized even in the very early 1900s in this subbasin, and the Solano County Board of Supervisors appointed a water council in 1940 to promote water development and study local water needs. By the 1950s, it was recognized that it was really important that another source of water supply be developed for the county's future, and construction of the Solano project began in 1953. Oops. Sorry. So essentially, the surface water, before 1960, when the first water deliveries began in 1959, most of the water needs for the subbasin were met by using groundwater. And then following construction of the Solano project, that's when surface water use greatly increased, supplemental surface water was provided to farmlands, and groundwater use decreased. So new farmland coming into production used mostly surface water, and now the Solano project provides water that irrigates almost 1,000 farms in Northern California. And as we'll illustrate later in this presentation, the foresight that led to the use of surface water and decreased the reliance on groundwater led to the recovery of groundwater levels that had begun to decline in those earlier years until the Solano project came online. So in the earlier presentation, there was discussion about the various beneficial users and uses, and in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk a little bit about where that occurs. So this slide shows groundwater use by many private property owners. There are approximately 3,000 domestic water supply wells that have been constructed in the subbasin. And these yellow squares on the left-hand side of the screen, they show 1 mile square areas where fewer domestic wells have been constructed. And then as you look towards the western side of the subbasin, the medium to darker brown squares show where more domestic wells have been constructed, and particularly in the northwestern area of the subbasin north of Vacaville. And these domestic wells, the right-hand image on the screen, these domestic wells range in depth from less than 75 feet, the browner colored squares, to more than 300 feet deep, the darker purple squares. And then agricultural wells to support ag needs. There's approximately 800 ag wells that have been constructed in the Solano Subbasin. And again, the yellower squares have fewer wells constructed within a 1 mile square area. And most wells have been constructed in the squares that are a lighter orange to orange color. So most of the ag wells have been constructed in the northern portion of the Solano Subbasin, and that's important when we start to look at water budget information and when we start to look at how water is used on the whole and what that means in the future. So these agricultural wells are generally deeper than domestic wells and are typically greater than 200 feet deep, with many of the agricultural wells being constructed to depths of over 400 feet deep. So that's the darker purple squares on this image. As was mentioned earlier, there are community water systems that are important to meet the water supply needs in the area. And there are often combinations of water sources used within these cities, so both surface water and groundwater. Another important thing that we're looking at in snapshots over multiple years of history, but this is just one example, is changes in agricultural land use. And this relates directly to the total amount of water needed to support those land uses. So looking at this information over time, we are caring about the source of the water used, whether it's surface water versus groundwater, and the total amount of the water used during the year, and particularly during drier years. And this particular slide shows how we look at differences in land use, and from, in this case, 1993 to 94 to 2014. And we see an increase here as one example of perennial crops. So that's the darker brownish color near the northern part of Solano Subbasin in 1993, primarily in that area. And then as we look to 2014, we see an increase. The acreage of these crops altogether in the Solano Subbasin over this 20-year period increased by about 18,675 acres. So this is important to track, how land uses change and how water uses change along with those land uses. The next several slides are going to be about what we've been working on most recently to look at the physical description of the subbasin. So one of the requirements of the groundwater sustainability plan is to include a hydrogeologic conceptual model. And this type of model doesn't refer to a mathematical model, rather it refers to a descriptive model that uses physical data and groundwater and surface water quality and quantity measurements to characterize the physical components of the subsurface and then how water moves in and out of the subsurface, including the interaction between surface water and groundwater systems in the subbasin. So this physical model also does inform how we construct a mathematical model. This is a modeling tool to help us compute water budget information for the subbasin. And this is not just to look back in time historically for many, many years or currently, as we look today, but also the regulations require looking 50 years into the future. So with all the complexity of how water and land use occurs in the subbasin, a modeling tool is quite helpful to do that. A key part of the physical model is the construction of what are called geologic cross-sections. And I'm going to show an example of this in the next slide. In the subbasin, we've constructed 15 geologic cross-sections. And these are located at these multiple colored lines that you see on the central image in this figure. And some of these cross-sections extend to depths of over 2,500 feet into the subsurface. So on this slide, if you imagine cross-section locations that are shown on a smaller image of the map that I just showed, where it shows all the locations of these sections. And then imagine a downward vertical slice through the earth. And this image that's in front, that on the lower right-hand side of the screen, is an aerial image, and it's sort of a pseudo 3D image. And the front-facing piece of that pseudo 3D image is a slice down and looking into the earth. And we're looking on the left-hand side of the image, the screen, an image that's the largest image here. This is a geologic cross-section where we're showing a more zoomed-in view to describe a little bit more about how we construct these. So we use reports that are prepared by drilling contractors. When they drill a well, they are required to file a report with the Department of Water Resources to describe, what they've encountered during the drilling process, what kind of materials, soil, silt, sands, gravels, that they're bringing up as they're drilling the well. There are also oil and gas contractors that have drilled to much, much greater depths than drilling contractors. And we've used this information. They're called geophysical logs, and they look with digital data into the subsurface to also look at the properties of what's encountered in the subsurface to inform what the oil and gas interests, where they can produce from. But we use this information because this information extends through freshwater bearing deposits, and it helps us to define not only where groundwater has been developed historically, but also where additional freshwater occurs. So we use all of this information together to help us characterize where groundwater occurs, how it moves in the subsurface. And here we're interested in looking at some different characteristics of what occurs in the subsurface. At the top of this cross-section, along the land surface, as we move from west to east, we're seeing kind of a white space, and this is the alluvial sediments. These are unconsolidated or loose sediments of sands and gravels and silts. As we move to the west on the edge of this cross-section, we see how those disappear. What we also see is that as we are going to the west, there are older formations, what are colored for visual delineation. These units aren't really this color in the subsurface, but in order to identify different formations that occurred at different points in time in geologic history and the nature of these deposits, some are much lower permeability, means it's much harder for water to move through some of these very old rocks, such as this one to the far west called the pre-Tehama units, Great Valley Sequence. This is much lower permeability than comparable sediments within the alluvial deposits. So one of the reasons that all of this is important, and I should mention before I go on, the city of Vacaville develops groundwater from the basal Tehama formation. And we see that there are some locations within the basal Tehama that have sandier deposits than others. And we can tell this by these blue squiggly lines that help us to characterize where these deposits are coarser or where they're finer, and where water can be produced with greater ease from great depths in the subsurface. So the less permeable the formation is, or the deposits are, the longer it takes for water to move back into those deposits when it's removed in order to replenish those deposits. So this is an example, if you look to the western side of this cross-section, where the alluvium peters out to where it's not really present, at least in this particular location, and it's lower permeability deposits. The wells that are completed in these lower permeability deposits may have a greater tendency to experience water level declines, or if wells are constructed in close proximity to one another, there may be more interference between adjacent pumpers. Another thing that we're wanting to look at as we characterize the land surface and the subsurface is the potential for where groundwater recharge can occur. So when we remove groundwater for beneficial use, we also want to consider where we can put water back into the ground and where the soils and the deeper deposits, are conducive to doing that. So this map shows, in bright colors, the greener ones being where there's a greater opportunity for recharge to occur. So in the northern part of the subbasin, and then a lesser opportunity for recharge to occur in areas where we move to the oranger to the darker, the red colors. One of the things that is very important about what we can look at with historical monitoring data, there are wells that have been monitored for decades, at least since the 1930s, for some of the wells in the subbasin. And it's really helpful to look at what happened over time. And this, as I mentioned earlier, is a really good example to show when the Solano project came online, when it started delivering water, and then how that large role in the use of surface water, it played a role in not only helping to meet water demands, but also in resulting in an increase in water levels, meaning a replenishment of the groundwater system and water levels rising in response to that use of surface water. So we've heard exceptions to this, especially in some of those areas on the far western part of the subbasin. As I just mentioned a moment ago, this can be due to how wells are constructed in the older, lower permeability formations, and also other local factors like the density of wells that are constructed in close proximity to one another, and also changes in land use. We also are taking a look at the deeper part of the system. So there are differences between where measurements are taken, not only spatially in a lateral sense, but also how wells are completed in a vertical sense. So there are different water levels that can be measured at different depths below the land surface, even if those two wells are located at the same, in very close proximity to one another. You can measure very different water levels depending upon how those wells are constructed. So these particular graphs, these are water levels over time shown for wells completed in the basal zone of the Tehama Formation, primarily representing wells by the city of Vacaville, including monitoring wells and constructed for the city of Vacaville. And these are showing changes in water level measurements over time. And there's also a history of how groundwater has been developed by the city of Vacaville within the subbasin in these deeper sediments. And there was a strategy to move some of that development of groundwater further to the north in the northerly part of the Solano subbasin. And that resulted in some increase of water levels, but also a lowering of water levels, which are actually not just it's not a level like a water table level. These units at this depth are actually representing pressure and the height to which water will rise within the system. So when that water is newly developed in the northern part of the system, there was a period experiencing some water level decline and then stabilization from about 2010 forward into the future once that pressure was equilibrated. There's another kind of measurement that is important to look at as we look at all these different kinds of monitoring parameters for the groundwater sustainability plan. And this includes measurements to track the elevation of the land surface. And these are fundamental to monitoring changes to detect potential land subsidence. So this is an example of satellite data, such as continuous global positioning system measurements. These are stations that have constant measurements of what's going on at the land surface. And these, along with other technologies, can be used for this purpose. Here, we're just showing a few stations, and we're highlighting a station near Vacaville with the yellow circle to highlight which graph I'm talking about. And what we see here is the data collected at this station over about a 7-year period show an overall change in land surface elevation of about 0.058 inches per year. So essentially, this is a really, really small amount of overall change, a decrease in land surface elevation. And this change doesn't necessarily even represent a permanent or what's called an inelastic land surface displacement, because what we also see from 2017 to 2019, we see an overall trend of 0.131 inches per year. Again, a small amount, but more than I just mentioned. And this is actually the opposite, where it's a land surface uplift or an upward increase of the land surface elevation. So this is also an important indication of what's going on in response to groundwater produced and what water levels are doing. So it's another important cross-check of how that's affecting what goes on with sediments in the deep subsurface. So I'm going to show one slide relating to groundwater quality. We have a lot of information that we're looking at for groundwater quality, but just for illustration, and it sounds like from the breakout groups that this was an interest, knowing what's going on with different water quality parameters. This is one, nitrate, that we're interested in looking at the distribution of what's occurring with historical measurements of water quality in the subbasin. So the subbasin proper is all this green, lime green area, and then over that we have locations shown by dots where there are wells with groundwater quality data, some that may have a very long period of record, and others, a less information. So this particular image is just showing the average nitrate concentration at these well locations. And the drinking water standard that we're relating these to is 10 milligrams per liter as nitrogen, which is the drinking water limit. And we're showing that there are a lot of wells that have average concentrations that are in the greens, and that's very good. That's very low nitrate concentrations. The ones that are popping up as red are showing average nitrate concentration. That means it's exceeding the nitrate drinking water limit. So where it's a private water supply well, this is something that's not typically known, because those types of wells are most often only tested at the time that they're constructed along with bacteria. This is different for community water systems that are required to test water quality on a regular basis. So there's a better understanding of water coming from a community water system and served out to customers as compared to what occurs at a private water supply well. So I'm going to switch gears to another topic. We're going to touch briefly on what we've been doing to look at water budget analyses in the Solano Subbasin. And this is really just a portion of a water budget. It's a complicated analysis, and what we've been focusing on to date for a number of months is working with the GSAs to receive information on their land use and water use, and we are focused on the kinds of processes that occur in the area highlighted by this red box. So we're looking at all of the water that is inflowing into from the land surface into the subsurface. We're looking at flow coming in from surface water. We're looking at precipitation onto the land. We're looking at applied water for irrigation purposes. We're looking at water going out of this red box, meaning what's taken up by crops and otherwise evaporating and leaving this red box. And we're also looking at what is flowing out of this red box. All of these computations, then we are adding and subtracting and looking at things that are occurring over a long period of time. So the period of time that we're looking at is from 1991 to 2017. And this is just the preliminary look at what's happening. And for each of these, what we call time steps, parts of years and 1 year to the next year, we're looking at, after we do all of these inflow and outflow computations, what is the net amount that is then moving into the groundwater system. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next slide. What we are coming to in future analyses that we're in the middle of now is adding on to this lower part of this system. So with the water budgets that we've been working on, we've received data from all of the GSAs, and then we've made computations for the GSA areas. And in the Delta region, this has included not only the Northern Delta GSA, but also the Sacramento County GSA, and then other GSAs that aren't really part of either of those GSAs directly yet. And then the city of Vacaville, Solano Irrigation District, and the Solano Subbasin GSAs. So when we look at all this information, I know this is kind of a cut to the bottom line sort of thing. There are a lot of numbers that got crunched, and we're looking at this as just the net amount of overall what happened when we took all of this information from 1991 to 2017, all of the inflows, all of the outflows, and then what did we look at as what was coming out of this, land surface to root zone part of the surface water system, and able to result in recharge to the groundwater system. So the net amount that we're seeing on average is about 27,000 acre feet per year. And this does not yet include what I'm going to show on the next slide, the other groundwater component that was below that red box. And then just to give you a little bit more context, when I'm describing an acre foot per year, if you can think of a football field with 1 foot of water, depth of water on that field, that's what we're talking about. 27,000 of those is how much water we're talking about moving into the subsurface on average each year. And that was for computations for the entirety of the subbasin. So another thing that we're looking closely at, and we'll be even looking more closely at, is what happens in spatially distinct parts of the subbasin. So the Delta has one type of thing going on. Other areas of the subbasin have very different types of things going on with water use and what's happening in the subsurface. So altogether, in the next steps, we're looking at the full water budget. And to do this, we're developing a mathematical or a numerical groundwater modeling tool. So this is using software to do very complex computations over a long period of time historically, but this is also the tool that we will be using to look 50 years into the future. So here's where we pick up more specifics about inflow into the groundwater system, the outflow from the groundwater system, but also a really important part of the use of the modeling tool is being able to better track what's going on with surface water and groundwater exchange between those two systems. So the next thing that I'm going to touch on is surface water and groundwater connectivity. This is a really important piece of the groundwater sustainability plan, and what you'll be hearing more and more about is how it relates to determining whether or not there's a sustainable groundwater resources, and how we ultimately determine what composes the sustainable yield for the subbasin. There are what are called 6 sustainability indicators, and looking at the potential effect on stream flow depletion and ensuring that it's not significant and unreasonable is one of those sustainability indicators. And in future meetings, we'll be talking more about that. But for now, we're just going to describe how we're trying to look at this information scientifically and to gather more information. There's been a lot of monitoring measurements that have been made historically near the Poudre Creek system and elsewhere in the Subbasin. We're trying to look at the available data to best as we can understand it. But we're also just recently involved in a project in collaboration with the University of California at Davis to further evaluate surface water and groundwater connectivity. And the water level data are being used to help evaluate the spatial and seasonal differences in depths to groundwater, and also to help provide information on ecological habitats. So as I think Genevieve mentioned earlier, groundwater dependent ecosystems are a very important beneficial user in the subbasin that is getting more and more attention, especially with the groundwater sustainability plan development. So just recently, we've been able to install monitoring wells as part of this project at 4 locations shown in the bright yellow dots on this map. And there's also 1 additional planned site when we can get the access on that site. At each of these locations, we've installed 4 to 6 monitoring wells at each of these sites in order to look at different water levels in relative to their proximity to the Poudre Creek system. And then these monitoring wells vary in depth from 15 to 60 feet. And all of this helps us better understand, when surface water is coming into the system, how fast does it leave the stream bed and reach the groundwater table? And that helps tell us something about the properties of these sediments. And that helps inform how we represent that information in the modeling tool that we're developing. And we really appreciate, all of the participation by the landowners who are involved in this and provided access to the property to allow for this project to go forward. So as Chris and Genevieve mentioned, we have the groundwater sustainability plan development underway. We have draft sections that we've been working on. Key technical pieces that we've been especially working on the last few months are technical memorandums with kind of the heavy lift to the technical details. And as was mentioned by Chris, we're trying to have the groundwater sustainability plan itself be a little bit more publicly digestible, reader friendly, that for anybody who's interested, they can dive into more of these appended documents. And we're looking at the draft GSP being ready to roll out in its totality in fall next year, and then the final GSP in the latter part of fall next year, with a delivery date required to DWR by the end of January 2022. So we're especially seeking your input, as has been mentioned several times tonight. We're very much interested in knowing different perspectives on groundwater interests and issues. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Vicki. And just, super helpful. We're actually going to be heading into another set of breakout rooms. So Vicki, would you mind sharing your
Sure.
screen? And I'll go ahead and share mine. So we're heading into breakout rooms. It'll be very similar. You all know what to expect. The focus of the questions for this round will be really around, any additional clarifying questions based on what Vicki presented, any surprises, how closely does what we presented align with your own experience? We just want to see if there's any kind of disconnects there, or places for us to further inquire, like, that doesn't actually match up with, what I've been seeing on the ground. So the other piece is really around, we'd love to hear more about how does groundwater impact your quality of life? And, as you think about groundwater in the future, what worries you? So that was the first round of breakout. But if you weren't able to weigh in at the last round, then please do, give us your thoughts during this round. All right, with that, Amy, do you feel like I need to share my screen, or are we good?
I think we're good. I'm going to open the rooms once again. I will send a note. We'll have about 12 minutes in the rooms. I'll send a note when we're about halfway through. And you should get whizzed right back once they close. If you don't, on the bottom right-hand side of your computer screen, you'll see leave room. Don't leave meeting, just leave room in case you don't get automatically whizzed. But it should do that, although sometimes the cyber world does its own thing. So I'm gonna open all rooms and you'll have a chance to click join when you see the invitation. Great. And Kate or Elizabeth, if you're there and you need help, just let me know. Hi, Lou.
Hello.
Hi. Do you remember which room you were in, or who was your facilitator or expert?
I got knocked off. I was on number 4.
Oh, you were in 4 before. Okay, great. I will assign you to 4 right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, and Kate, if you're there, let me know.
All right. So, really good conversations. It's just good to like hear where people are coming from, what their thoughts are. I mean, I know for us, we continue to have themes of contamination in our work. And I'll just say like drinking water quality in general, it's really important to know that that's an issue for you, because we then take that and we say, okay, you know, we heard groundwater quality is a real issue for folks. So those kinds of things are really helpful for us. Really want to appreciate all of you for doing that. So we have about 3 minutes left. We want to let you go on time, so we aren't going to be able to hear or report out to other ones. But facilitators, if you have a minute to put something in the chat and just, you know, add a sentence about any themes that you heard from your group. You already heard about mine. That would be great. And I'll just say we have some next steps. And so Amy, I'm searching around for the right tab. Is there anything that you would?
Do you want me to share my screen?
That would be great if you've got it up.
Yep. Okay, let me just present and I will share screen. Okay. Can you see it?
Yep.
Great. Go ahead.
So 2 hours has gone by. There was a lot of information that was shared, and there could have been more even. So if you find yourself curious and would like to engage deeper in these issues, we welcome you to observe the Community Advisory Committee. It's coming up on October 29th. Again, just talk with Amy about that. We'd also love to have you take the survey. So that's places where we would really track what kind of groundwater user you are and what matters most to you. So that's a really important way of doing it, even beyond, it's important, even having been here tonight, to also fill out that survey. We'd love to keep in touch with you by staying on the GSP newsletter. We will be including you, your email address on that newsletter list as a result of tonight. So if you don't want to be involved, just unsubscribe, no problem. But we sure hope that you will stay involved. And again, you can email Amy with any questions. So that's all we have from our end. It's been rich conversations. And I want to just hand it back over to Chris for any final words. And you're muted. I think I get a gold star for every time.
Yeah, thank you, because I said something really fantastic on unmuted. But no, just want to reiterate, thank you everyone for spending a few hours with us tonight, and look forward to your robust input on this process as we move forward. As I said on the outset, this plan is for you. It's for the stakeholders in the Solano Subbasin. We want to make sure we put a plan together that makes sense for everyone, that we protect our groundwater resources, we protect the environment. We also make sure that we can continue with our agricultural practices of farming and ranching for many, many generations to come. So again, thank you for being here. Look at the links, look at the website, send us some notes, and look forward to our next meeting when we dive even a little deeper into some of these very meaty topics. So thanks again.